All right. Welcome, everyone. Thanks to all of our folks watching at home, and thanks to everybody here with us in Decatur, Georgia. We're so excited to have you all out with us this evening to celebrate a really exciting and important book, Good Sex Stories, Science, and Strategies for Sexual Liberation. That's right. You can clap. We are here tonight with the author, Dr. Candice Nicole Hargons. Yes, give it up. And she is here in conversation with Ashley Cobb. Yes. Ashley Cobb is the millennial microphone for Black women seeking ultimate pleasure and sexual liberation. She's a sex columnist, media personality, and HIV activist known for her fun, down to earth, and practical advice. Ashley has been featured in top media outlets including Essence, Huffington Post, Cosmopolitan, and Women's Health. She's also been featured on Bravo TV's Love Match Atlanta. So, welcome, Ashley. And the woman of the hour is Dr. Candice Nicole Hargons. She is the award winning associate professor at Emory University's Rollins School of Public Health, where she studies sexual wellness and liberation. With over 70 published articles, Dr. Hargons has made substantial contributions to the field, positioning herself as a leading authority in her discipline. Her innovative work has been widely recognized and featured in major podcasts and publications such as Huffington Post, Essence, Good Housekeeping, Women's Health, Blavity, Cosmopolitan, and the New York Times. A graduate of Spelman College, Georgia State University, and the University of Georgia, Dr. Hargons has also worked with several businesses, including Paramount, Lexmark, Penguin Random House, and universities, including the University of Tennessee, Georgia Tech, Emory University, Howard University, and other K 12 school systems on enhancing awareness of sexual health, building social justice competence, healing from racial trauma, leadership development, and creating a culture of courage. As a thought leader, Dr. Hargons continues to shape the conversation around sexual wellness, advocating for liberation and wellness within marginalized communities. So we're very honored to be here to have this conversation about this brand new book, Good Sex, which states that we all deserve sex that's great for everyone, which is a beautiful hypothesis and statement. So we're going to get right into it. I want to let our folks who are watching virtually know that they can put their questions in the chat at any time. And for all of you who are here with us in person, when it's time for you to ask a question, please just raise your hand and I'm going to bring the microphone to you so that everyone, including our online folks, can hear you. So, without further ado, we are going to get right into the conversation with Ashley Cobb and Dr. Hargons.
Hey. So, put that back some. All right. So we are here to talk about good sex.
Yes,
right?
yes.
Right. Raise your hand if you like good sex. That's everybody in here. So we're in the right place. Right? Cool. All right. So, Candice, thank you for having me.
First of all, thank you for being here.
So, what makes good sex? Let's start there.
I think that everybody gets to decide for themselves what good sex is. But for me, I always have one word that's universal. All the other words, they can switch, but transcendent is my word. I want it to make me levitate. I want to see something divine in the sexual experience.
I want to see God.
Listen, I want to commune with the universe and my husband over there looking good.
So, can you tell us what inspired you to write the book?
Yeah. I wrote the book that I needed and wanted. So me and Dr. Shamika right here did a big sex study in 2021, and we recruited so many people to tell us their stories, share their experiences with us. And when it came down to it, there were 20 ingredients for good sex that they let us know were relevant for them. And I was like, all of these things could be their own book, but I want to fit them into one book. And I want to tell it in my voice, because a lot of the books that I've read, some of my favorite books, are written by white women. And I feel like they're great books that I always refer back to, but I didn't see a voice that looked like me in that. And I was like, what can I add that would make this contribution special? And so building on the science and the stories from the people that I've had a chance to work with, I knew that I wanted to write a book where young Candice and old Candice could still reference it.
So speaking on those ingredients, right? So I wrote down some that I thought, pertain to me and probably other people. Good sex is nasty.
Come on.
Good sex is fun.
Mm-hmm.
Good sex is loving.
Yes.
Good sex is sensual. And good sex is orgasmic. Sorry, I can't talk today because we're not having orgasms, right? So expound on those.
So nasty, shout out to Janet Jackson. Listen, from Velvet Rope on up, like no,
Listen.
but right.
Okay. It was. Okay.
But I like that word. It refers to kinky sex, but I like the framing of nasty because it invites us to think about the way sex has been cast, all this taboo and shame and all of these stereotypes associated with it. But sometimes you want it to be a little nasty. You don't want it to be prim and proper and perfect all the time. And so exploring all of the things that have been considered deviant across different generations, but bringing them into the fold for the possibilities of sex. For fun, like you want it to be an experience where you either have some thrill fun or some chill fun, right? So thrill fun is the excitement, the novelty.
Because if it's boring, we're not going to do that.
You're not going to do it again. Right. Absolutely. Sensual. You want all your senses to be delighted. Taste, touch, smell, sound. And I don't even remember what the other
loving, orgasmic.
Okay. Thank you. Loving. It doesn't, I think a lot of people consider sex based on these really unseasoned sexual scripts that it has to be between a man and a woman in a married commitment, monogamously in love. And it's like, you can love a person that's a one night stand. You can treat them with reverence and care, and so I wanted to expand the way people understand what love is. And then the last one was orgasmic. Yeah, we all know about the orgasm gap, right?
We do.
Where you have way over here at 95% cis heterosexual men having orgasm 95% of the time, and then way over here 65% of the time cis heterosexual women. And it's like, that's some unfortunate math.
It really is.
Listen,
it's not math.
It's not mathing. So we wanted to talk about like how orgasm should be an option for everybody anytime they want to have it, right?
Okay, so you talk about in the book about dismantling harmful narratives around sex. So how do you suggest people challenge and refrain from these beliefs in their own lives?
The practice, right? So we get these unseasoned cultural recipes is what I call them. All of these ideas about what good sex should be, who should be having it. And your practice ground is your sexual space. It's your site for liberation. And so just because there are scripts out there suggesting that sex should be one way doesn't mean you have to practice in that way. And so I suggest we do the things that might give us pause, might make us afraid, courageously. And that means that if there's something that you were taught maybe you shouldn't do, but it's not something that you have on your no list, give it a shot. Be curious about it and be courageous. If you like it, you like it. If you don't, you don't. But give yourself the opportunity to try.
Right. I always tell people, how do you? People often say, "Well, I don't like that," and I ask them, "Well, how do you know if you don't like it if you haven't tried it?" I'm a trisexual, right? So I'll try something at least 3 times. Yes! The first time I gotta like first time, okay, that could have been a fluke, what I'm saying?
Right. Because sometimes you don't know what you're doing the first
Second time, okay. At the third time, if I do something or not, I'm like, okay, I for sure know I don't like it or I do like it. But I can't say if I like something if I haven't even tried it.
I'm gonna borrow trisexual.
Trisexual, baby.
I like where we
I'm
went.
I'm a trisexual. Okay. What was your favorite chapter in the book? And why?
I think the chapter that I keep coming back to is the one about communication.
Okay.
Because I think it's so foundational. So a lot of us don't have the skill set to talk about sex. And I break down some of the science about why that is. Like, what are the things we're afraid of when it's time to initiate a conversation about sex with anybody, not just your partner, but anyone. And so people tend to fear their relationship can't handle it, they tend to feel like, I shouldn't have to talk about this. Like, you should just know.
Mind readers?
But please mind read me, right?
Yeah.
And it's like, that's not how human beings work. Or people are afraid that they're going to hurt their partner's feeling, that they're going to tap dance on somebody's ego, or people are afraid of looking inadequate. So they have their self fears. They're like, oh, if I say it like this, they're going to know that I don't know what I'm talking about, or I don't know what I'm doing. And so I like to frame the strategies for how to have those conversations anyway. So that was probably one of the chapters where I learned the most, and it was fun to write.
So can you go in depth on some of the strategies you talked about?
Yeah. Okay. I like to make it meta. And me and my husband were talking about this just the other day. So it's like your body language, your nonverbals are still a form of expressive language. Right. And sometimes you need to bring those into the conversation. So if you do feel worried about something or nervous about something, if you notice my jaws clenching a little tight, it's because, and give your partner an explanation for what they might be seeing in you, because we're attuned to all of those cues, right? And I like to make it meta where it's like, all right, this is what I'm going to say to you. And then ask your partner what they heard you say, and then what they heard you say, right? Yeah, so verbatim, what words did I use?
Right.
And then what did you hear underneath that? So at least you can capture, okay, these are the words you heard. And now what meaning did you make of it?
Right.
And then when you know what your partner's meaning is, you can challenge it. You can say, yeah, that is what I meant. Or, kind of back it up. And I feel like those are some of the strategies I give to clients.
Okay, good. So being a Black woman, what advice would you give a Black woman who is navigating both societal expectations and personal desires when it comes to sex?
Respectability politics will not save us. It won't. And I understand where the strategy came from. I get why people have used it. But at the end of the day, we have still died. We have still been sacrificed. We have still worn ourselves to the bone. And so if there are aspects of your sexual self that you've been hiding or pretending like don't exist for the sake of respectability politics, that's not going to save you from the scrutiny that all Black women are going to be under in the type of society we live in.
Right. How can individuals begin to cultivate a deeper connection with their own bodies to improve their sexual experiences?
I love a good little mindful masturbation.
Yes.
Where your solo sexual experience is one that is personal to you. You can refine it over time. There are things you can learn about yourself, and to do it with attunement to what parts of your body feel good, what parts of your body don't feel as good. Where are you aching? Where are you pleased? How are you breathing? What do you notice around you? How cold is it? How warm is it? Like being really mindful about how you touch yourself. I even think about like when you're in the shower, when you're getting out of the shower, like do you rush through washing yourself or do you take your time? Do you rush when you're putting your lotion on, your Vaseline, your oils, your shea butter? Or do you take your time? Like how we treat ourselves with tenderness and care can really reflect how we're approaching our sex life too.
So what do you have to say to women? Because I grew up, I guess, like a lot of you in the church, right? And so growing up in the church, sex is a sin, quote unquote. And so it's you're not supposed to be doing masturbation either.
That's right.
So if someone who's in the in betweens of that, how would you help someone to come to terms with masturbation is not a sin?
Right. So it's referencing, if you're identifying as Christian, referencing those like scriptures on onanism. And most of the masturbation myths are based in like a misinterpretation of those scriptures.
Okay.
And so if you're continuing in your spiritual practice, as opposed to somebody that's kind of divested from it, there might be two different things that I tell you.
Okay.
So a person who's still continuing in that practice, I invite them to look at Song of Solomon.
Oh.
I invite them to think about how beautifully sensual the Bible can be, if that's your text of reference.
Right.
If you are a Jewish person, it talks about sexual pleasure. It like these are built into most Abrahamic texts. But if you've divested from that, explore other aspects of spirituality, or explore like how you let go of some of that Christianity in other areas as a part of masturbation. And it means that you might still deal with some guilt and shame. Like that doesn't go away just because you decided that you didn't believe something anymore. But how do you hold compassion for yourself when you feel that guilt and shame? So maybe it comes up after you experience masturbation. Where's your self-compassion around that? I get why I would feel guilty based on 25 years of being inundated with this. I'm going to release that with deep breathing or with talking to somebody that really gets it. And a little bit less guilt each time, a little bit less shame each time, but still continuing the practice.
So sometimes as women, we have been taught that our pleasure kind of goes in the back burner, right? We're supposed to make sure our partners are pleased, and what we want kind of comes last.
Yeah.
So what would you say to that? How can a woman, let's use masturbation for example, how can someone use masturbation as a way to try to put themselves first?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's an ideal way to put yourself first, right? But you think about there are opportunities to learn what you like through masturbation that if you choose to be having partnered sex, you can share with your partner. I think a lot of people are still, even in 2025, afraid to use sex toys with their partner.
Very much so.
And so inviting them into that experience, if you find that you have the type of partner who will guilt or shame you for solo sex or make it seem like the solo sex is in competition with them, then they have a lot of unlearning and unpacking to do as well. And so that's something you can do with the professional. But if they're willing to learn, if y'all are willing to do it together, then you can talk about, okay, if I masturbate and this comes up for you, where do you get that idea from? Where does that come from? So I think working through some of those things in conversation and sometimes with a professional can really be a big
so
help.
To piggyback off that, you talk about pleasure being a form of liberation. So can you expound on that, and how can we reclaim pleasure in a society that often stigmatizes it?
In this year 2025 I'm really about pleasure as one aspect of intimate justice. Because I don't know about y'all, but a lot of people in my community, a lot of people worked so deliberately across decades, but certainly in the past 5 to 10 years around social justice and externally focusing all of our work to dismantle these systems of oppression, only to see it thrown back in our faces, only to see all the labor that we put forth eroded in 1 month, in a month and a half, and counting. But a lot of people who were doing that work, and I work with some of them as a psychologist, came home to orgasm inequity, came home to violence in their household, came home to an intimate injustice while they were fighting for social justice. So I think pleasure is one of those places where you can play around with reclaiming that. Because you can practice liberation right in your household. You can practice liberation with your own body, how you talk to yourself like you love yourself, how you treat yourself with the goodies, all the good life has to offer, is like a playground for that, so that you're nourished enough to keep fighting this shit, right? Because we're coming out of this thing. You just talked about Black women in particular being taxed, being burnt out, being like giving everything we have to everybody else. And then not having anything poured back into us. If we have to reclaim that pleasure to pour back into ourselves, then I think it's an essential site of liberation.
I agree. In your book, you talk about the idea of good sex being unique to each person. Hold on. What advice would you give to someone exploring their own sexual desires and preferences?
So I start with 19 of the, I call them good sex seasonings in the book. And I would say approach the book like a menu. So look through the 19 things, whether it's love or passion or intimacy or fun, nastiness, whatever, and start with the one that piques your interest. Read that chapter. I wrote it in a way that you don't have to read it chronologically. It's not a linear text. It's like, which one am I curious about? I want to have more fun. Start with the fun chapter. Or I want to have liberating sex. Start with the last chapter and then go from there and figure out how those strategies that I present might be something you practice for a month, 3 months, 6 months. I like to let people know This is not, oh, you read this book and now your sex life is good.
Okay.
I wrote the book and it's not going to be perfect, right? So it's like, how do you practice these things and have compassion when you're with yourself when you fall off the consistency?
Okay, so I'm just gonna go through the 19.
Yeah, go for it.
Okay, so let's go. All right, so good sex is intimate. Good sex is fun. Good sex is pleasurable. And if something pops out and you want to talk about it, you can stop me. Cool. Okay. Good sex is pleasurable. Good sex is satisfying. Talk about that. Talk about that.
Yes. Okay, so pleasure and satisfaction are different things.
Okay. Yeah.
Right?
Okay.
So, you said right. Satisfaction is I had a hope for this sexual experience or an expectation for this sexual experience. I wanted something and I got that something.
Okay.
Right? So Cindy Meston's work talks about over 200 reasons that people have sex. If you had sex for revenge's sake, did you get the revenge you wanted?
Satisfied.
The sex was satisfying.
Check. Okay.
Right. So that's what satisfaction is, as opposed to pleasure, which is like those physiological and psychological sensations of goodness, like of enjoyment that you might feel.
Okay. Sex is orgasmic. I already talked about that. Good sex is connected.
Connected in this way is about connecting with your own body, seeking embodiment, and knowing your sexual self, growing your sexual self, honestly.
Good sex is passionate. Good sex is reciprocal. Say it again.
Listen.
Good sex is reciprocal.
Listen, and I started with Lauryn Hill, right? Because she told us about reciprocity in 1999 in the Miseducation, right?
Right.
And I think that's important because it's not transactional. Reciprocity and transactionality are different. So it's like not tit for tat. I gave you head, you give me head. I did this, you do that. It's like, what needs do we need to meet with mutuality for each other, right? How do we offer something that feels like it meets a need and the person, and how do we learn to receive something that feels like it meets a need?
And you talked about meeting in the middle. So what is that? So talk about that.
Okay, so my husband knows this. This is our origin story.
Okay.
So when my sorority sister, when my line sister introduced us, it was like close to my birthday weekend. 10 years ago.
Oh, okay. Oh, look at there. 10 years ago.
And I was going on a ski trip.
Okay.
But we had just started talking, and he was in Louisiana, and I was in Atlanta at Emory for internship. Okay. And I was like, you know what? How about we just get in our cars and both drive and meet in the middle? And so we ended up serendipitously in Meridian, Mississippi, which means the middle, and kicked it that whole weekend.
What's in Meridian, Mississippi?
Not a thing. The reason why it resonates with me though is because I like Alice Walker's work, and in her book Meridian was like, there's something about this just hits for me. So we met there. I mean, nothing was up in there. We went hiking, we had some Thai food, you know. But so I take that approach to everything, and I'm that type of person where it's like, if there's some common ground, if there's a way that we can meet in the middle, can we both put an effort to find our way there? And it doesn't always work that way, right? It's not always 50-50. Sometimes it's 60-40, 80-20. Right. But if we're both taking steps toward each other, I think that matters.
Good. Okay, sex is nasty. I already talked about that. Good sex is exciting. Good sex is loving. Good sex is spiritual.
And I break down some of the things you talked about. So that's why I appreciate you bringing up like people who were raised in religion, people who were churchy. I wasn't raised that way. I had a Jehovah's Witness grandmother, but I also had like a cussing grandmama who was like, you know, my mom wasn't about that church life. And so
I was in a whole coat. No,
not a coat. And so but the funny part is you are not alone, and you know that. Yeah. You know that because who had a purity ring? You know what I mean? Right. So they were doing that to us. They were, but that wasn't my story. So it was like I talked about spirituality from like indigenous practices. I like Zalika Hepworth's work on Oshunality, Afro-Indigenous practices, and Abrahamic religions that many people, you know, were raised in. that it can be all of those things. It can be the universe. It can be the creator. It can be, like I started off, it can be transcendent. Yeah.
Good sex is sensual. Good sex is communicative. Good sex is wet.
Yes.
Talk about that.
Listen.
Let's talk about that.
Let's talk about Cardi and
wet.
Meg,
Like how wet though? Like how wet?
Right.
Like how wet
it
we
depends.
talking?
It depends on the day, right?
Like
what I love about that chapter is, so I start off with how WAP came out, and I was like, this all right. And I love Cardi.
Like,
listen, at the beginning I did, because first I was going through my own dry season.
Okay.
Okay.
I know. I like how we all did that collectively. All collectively. I love us.
Listen, and so how you just hear something, you be like, ain't it? But so when I heard it, the last thing I'm thinking about is that. And I'm like, but the reference, the beat in the back took me back to a place. And I don't know if anybody from Franklin, Virginia is watching, but there's some hoes in this house. There's some like that. That beat took me back to Candy with a little, candy cane over the eye, and the Armory in Virginia when I was just, doing splits and pee-popping in the handstand at any given teen party. And I was like, there's something to this that I'm resisting because of the season of life that I'm in. But I think one of the critiques I have of hip-hop, I love hip-hop. I raised on hip-hop, but one of the critiques I have is that we get into this wetter, wettest competition. You got to one-up somebody with your vaginal fluids.
Yes.
Goddamn.
Yes. Because I'll put on Instagram, and I'll say, because you talk about this in the chapter 2, how everyone should use lube.
Right.
And then I hear like, well, I don't need to use lube. My pussy wet. Congratulations.
Congrats.
Congratulations, girl.
You.
Right? Then another girl, well, my pussy wet too. I'm like, they try to one up
each other.
Strangers you don't even know.
It's like, okay, but lube is good for us all.
Yes.
Lube is good for us all.
Still need to use lube.
Right. So I kind of broke down, like, there's vaginal moisturizers, because some of us are getting into the peri and the menopause stages of life. You know what I mean? And it's like, things can change. And so, vaginal moisturizers exist, lubrication exists, and those possibilities we shouldn't be held to this standard of like, you have to be the wettest in the world, Aquafina and all this all the time, right? So after I kind of got over that, and I was like, it's all right. Then I was like, I kind of like this. song. So I had to reclaim. I had to pull it back in.
Good sex is safe. Talk about that for a second.
Yes.
And you talk about STIs and all those things. So talk about
I talk about consent. I talk about sexually transmitted infections, and I talk about contraception, all of those things. And I feel like for me, that probably was my least favorite chapter. And most people who know my research know I like sex positive, sexual functioning oriented research, because most of the studies on Black women focus on STIs, HIV, and unplanned pregnancy. And it's like there is so much more to our story than that, but it's still important because we are disproportionately impacted. And I know I want to give a reference to that, and I want to break down what all of our options are. And at the core of it, it's not even sex if it's not consensual.
Correct.
Right? And so I want that to be foundational. It couldn't even be a seasoning. It's like, this is the meal. It's consensual. But I wanted to break those pieces down because they're still very relevant. It's just not the predominant focus of what I like to talk about.
Good sex is relaxing. And you talk about strategies for sleep.
Come on.
Listen, every time, this is probably too much of my personal business,
Please
but we're here now. So, every time I want to go like have a really good sleep, I masturbate.
That's right.
And I'm out for the count.
That's right.
Yeah. Good sleep.
Listen, it's great sleep.
Amazing sleep.
It's amazing sleep. And I know my friend Dr. Nan knows all of the good neuroscience around why this is true, but like our body releases these neurotransmitting chemicals, and it's like, I can relax into myself, especially if you have a beautiful orgasmic experience, whether it's partnered or solo, like it facilitates a better quality sleep. And it's also just a strategy in all of the stress that we're facing. That's free. I always love to highlight the free strategies of stress reduction, right? And masturbation is one of them.
It is. Good sex is comfortable.
Mm-hmm.
And lastly, good sex is liberating.
Yes. Setting your sensual self free.
All right, let's see. Can you share any personal experiences or insights that you feel shaped your journey as a sex educator that influenced your writing of good sex?
Yes. Okay. So many things, but I think the ones that I lay out right in the beginning are me laying on my Aunt Tanya's lap, may she rest in heaven, getting my hair braided and beaded, and her telling on her phone, a little cordless phone call or a little corded phone call, probably at that time, with her homegirl talking about her sexual escapades. And I'm pretending to be asleep. Being nosy, like, oh, and then what? Like, so hearing about the pleasure and joy she had and what it meant to be a hot girl in the 90s, the late 80s and the 90s. And I was like, this sounds like everything. I wanted to be an adult so bad.
No.
Here we are. Adulthood is a hot mess. But so
the ghetto.
Right, it's the ghetto. It really is. My goodness. But hearing her stories, finding Cosmo magazine articles, just going to the store. There's a little grocery store across from where we used to live, getting those articles, finding a garbage bag of porn in the back of my grandfather's closet of VHS tapes, of course. And so putting together a hodgepodge of stuff that was so inaccurate. Let me just name it, right? But being curious about it from a really early age, looking through the Encyclopedia Britannica, and trying to find and trying to find out, like, when am I gonna get boobs? As we see, they never came. But the point is, I was curious. I wanted to know. So I've always been a precocious kid. I was a precocious kid, and I'm a curious woman. So I've always wanted to learn. And then when I found out I could be a sex researcher and a sex therapist, I was like, this is a career? Yes, I want to do this. So that was a part of the journey, like on the front end of it.
Okay. So lastly, this is the last question. What do you believe is the most important piece of advice for anyone seeking to have good sex in their relationships?
Start by defining it for yourself.
Okay.
And that means that you might have to go through, I know a lot of the sex educators, you yes, no, maybe so. So like all your yeses, all your nos, all your maybe so's. But then circling the things on the list that maybe you interrogate them a little bit, like, why is this a no? Why is this a yes? So starting with you and understanding what you want, and it can change and evolve. So 20-year-old Candice is a totally different sexual being than 35, 45, 55.
Now that is definitely true for me.
And letting it evolve and being all right with that.
20-year-old Ashley and 40-year-old Ashley are two different people.
Right.
We like two different things.
Right. And I love me some 20-year-old Candice and 42-year-old Candice, but very different experiences. Yes. What about for you? What would be your word of advice?
That's a good question. I want to answer the question. I'm here asking the questions.
First of all, I'm
asking the questions today. I wasn't here to answer no questions, Candice. That's not why I'm here. Well, what was the question I asked you?
Just your word of advice for somebody who wants to find their sexual self.
I think to piggyback off you really, in order to do that, you really have to figure out what you like. I don't know what I like if I don't know. I have to know what I like first.
That's right.
So I have to discover what that is first before I can do anything else, before I can tell my partner, before I can do all the things. I have to figure out what it is that I want and what I like. That's the bottom basic of it all. So starts there. So now we're to the part where everybody can participate.
Yay.
The questions. Right?
Yeah, so if you have a question, raise your hand and I'll bring you the mic. Yeah.
So I appreciate the ingredients of sex, right? And I think it is up to us to operationalize them for ourselves and for the people we are having the sex with. But my question to you is, when we're looking at the ingredients of sex, do you think that every sexual encounter should encompass all of those ingredients.
Absolutely not. So when I started the research project, I asked if you had 3 things that describe good sex, what would they be? So this list of 19 came from everybody giving 3 things. And then those were things that were specific to them. And then when you're working on enhancing or enriching your sex life, start with one thing. I love to take the smallest possible step as opposed to big leaps and bounds because it's not sustainable. So if there's something that you're like, oh, good sex to me is pleasurable, then you work incrementally toward pleasure in the way you define it. Like you said, you operationalize what pleasure is for you.
What are your 3? Now I'm in your business.
Oh, please be in my business. That's fine. I wrote a lot about my business.
What are your 3?
Transcendent is the first one.
Okay.
Pleasurable is the second one. And it varies day by day, month by month, year by year. And the third one is relaxing because we have a 6-year-old and a 1-year-old. And so, we're running raggedy.
I'm trying to figure out
raggedy.
For me, if I had to pick 3, like right now today, good sex is fun. Because we have to be fun. Good sex would be, God dang, Candice, so many. It would be pleasurable and reciprocal.
Oh, yes.
I think those are my 3.
I love that.
Yeah.
Hi, I had a question about I'm going to start with the communication chapter. I was trying to do the linear thing, but since you said we can start in any chapter,
start where you want.
Communication is probably my big one. With my partner or my husband, we've been married for 17 years, and when we get started, it's good, but we have an issue with initiation. So like, what is your take on like communication and the initiation kind of going back and forth? Because I'm like, I'm not gonna ask, like I'm not gonna say anything to you, and then he's got this rejection thing, and like it's a constant thing. We've been doing it for years. Like it's just so it's just like I don't know. It's like sometimes I'm like, okay, well, we'll just put it on the schedule so neither one of us have to initiate. But then the schedule falls off or whatever. Like initiation is just like a major theme. Is that in communication or is that like something else?
That's definitely a part of it.
Yeah.
I think that's so common. You are absolutely not alone in that. And you've been big married for a long time. You know what I mean? So I think that a lot of people struggle with initiation because we get these scripts on like, who is supposed to initiate and why? What does initiation mean? Right? So most people hear that the man is supposed to initiate most of their lives. That's a lot of pressure, right? When I work with couples who are heterosexual, sometimes around like year 4, year 5, the man like, all right now, I want to also feel desirable. Seduce me, you know, and then the woman's like, you ain't playing your part. No, I want to play that part, and so it's kind of some back and forth on it. But think about why you want to have sex. I always get to the like, what desire are you seeking to meet, or what need are you seeking to meet with sex? And then frame your initiation around that. So if it's like you want to feel closer to each other, just get closer to each other. If you want to feel pleasure, start pleasing the person. And it doesn't have to be a sexual way. It's like, is there something that you would like me to do for you? Or is there something that you would like, if you want to feel relaxed, you know what I mean? Start with relaxing each other. And so taking the pressure off, this has to end in sex. It's like, we're going to spend intimate time with each other. It could possibly end in sex. It might end in sleep. It could end in both. But as opposed to being like, okay, it gotta be sex, it has to be orgasm, and it has to be penis and vagina, and it has all of these things that we put on it that add layers of pressure. Just be like, today I'm going to kiss your neck, and that could be sex, or it could be a neck kiss, and that it could be whatever you want it to be. So taking the pressure off, like what initiation has to go to, because sometimes when we feel like it has to go all the way to one specific thing, that makes it high stakes. And then you can pragmatically take turns. Like, so sometimes I just invite couples to say, all right, you're taking turns, And then your signal for each other might not be verbal. It might be like, my turn is going to mean I'm wearing this necklace. You see this necklace, you know what it is. My turn is going to be I'm wearing the orange bonnet. The orange bonnet means, you know what I mean? Like, it got to be a head wrap, a bonnet, something. So it's like you can make cues if saying the words are tough, because expressive language doesn't always have to be verbal.
Mm-hmm. I saw a thing on Instagram yesterday, actually. He's a therapist, and he was telling his clients that with sex, sometimes in his household, with his wife, when they have a flannel rule. When we have a flannel, that means we're not having sex tonight, right? And then on the day that you want to have sex, they are wearing something that's not flannel.
That's right.
Right. Mm-hmm. So they're like, okay, she came up with flannel night, so I know that means we're not having sex.
Yeah.
That's actually a good idea.
And it reduces the sense of rejection. And all. Okay, I can see a little
flannel. We have an online question. If you could just kind of speak to what your book offers queer couples specifically.
Yeah. It centers marginalized experiences, and queer identities are a part of that, going from women who love women and men who love men, and people who identify as trans or gender expansive, people who identify as ace. Like, all of that is woven into the book, because I think queer people have always taught me the best lessons around good sex. Mm-hmm. Shout out to Audre Lorde. You know what I mean? It's like the uses of the erotic is like critical reading. And so I couldn't write a book about good sex and make it a heteronormative book. It just wasn't going to be that good, you know?
Do you have any tips for long-term queer couples that might be, I mean, they may be the exact same, but is there anything that you would recommend different?
I think referring to the sexual liberation history of queer people is a great starting place. Like, if there have been moments in your relationship where it feels like, okay, now how did we get to replicating heteronormativity? Even though, you know, because that happens all the time, right? Like, what kind of liberation did our community offer us that we're not taking up right now? That's what you can return to every time you kind of get into a little hiccup around sex. You get into scripts around sex that are like, these aren't serving us well. The stereotypes about queer people can sometimes get in the way, especially if you're on your coming out journey or your emergence into your queer identity journey. And it's like, I don't want to be this type of queer. Or, you know, I talked about, you know, what it means to invite your partner to switch when they're used to being a top or they're used to being a bottom. Like, all of these conversations are beautiful opportunities to try something new or to reinforce, this is why this is my boundary and this is what pleases me.
Thank you. Mm-hmm. Anybody back here got any questions? I'm going to check our online audience one more time. Well, one of the things that, oh yeah, all right. Let's get this to you.
I'd like to follow up on that last question and go back to something you were talking about early in the talk about the politics of respectability. And I assumed when you were talking about that mostly what we're struggling against when we talk about that is our own internalized version of what's respectable as opposed to what our partner brings to us. And I'm wondering if that dynamic, you see it in your practice playing out differently in non-hetero couples compared to heterosexual couples.
I think it depends on multiple intersections and not just sexual identity, like how much your community has built up respectability politics as a way to get free. So depending on whether you're a white person with a queer identity or a brown or black person with a queer identity, or depending on your age and what generation you grew up in, like, that could have been on the table. So if you're a gay man that grew up in the 60s and 70s, it's like, I still have to present mask. I still have to, you know, like, how do you let go of some of those things if that's not you? I think that if your partner is what it sounds like you said is if your partner is still trying to impose those things on you, how do you invite them to explain or explore what it means to them to still show up in that way? So having those conversations for me doesn't always mean you change behavior. Sometimes it's like you interrogate where the behavior came from, where the ideas or the values came from, and you decide, oh, this actually does work for me. But sometimes you find out, what am I upholding by trying to be this way instead of this way? Do I think I'm going to find a higher place on the human hierarchy? Am I still invested in elitism? Like what is it that's anchoring me to this way of being as opposed to others? And sometimes it's like, oh, this really works well for me. And I wouldn't feel like the worst person in the world if it were different, as opposed to I don't have a sense of inherent worthiness that's core to me. And so I'm building myself up by all of these things society says are the status quo.
One of the things that we've noticed as more and more queer and trans connection happens online is that in some ways it's positive because queer and trans youth are not being abused on the same levels and things. Kids aren't getting their first sexual experiences in bars. There's a lot of positives about it. Kids are much more aware of consent. There's a lot of good. But one of the negatives is I think that the first sexual experience can get really built up in young people's minds. And so then there's a lot of trepidation about it because stuff isn't happening organically and it's not happening in person. And so then they're like, really scared. And sometimes they're like 19, and hadn't even like held hands with somebody. And they might end up being ace, or they might really want to have sex with somebody, but they don't even know because they just have been really self-protective. And so as an adult that works with a lot of trans and queer kids, I'm trying to navigate, like my childhood was very different, right? Like I came of age in a very different way. And so I'm trying to navigate being sex positive without shaming anybody who might be ace, like I don't actually know how to support them because I'm like, I don't get out there, I feel weird about it, well, I also want them to have, I'm so delighted that they have safety that my generation didn't have.
Yes. I love that. And I think that I learned so much from generations that are younger than me about how to advocate for your own sense of safety, how to hold systems and people accountable to that. And they even give us feedback. So in our generation, while we're like, get out there, they're like, out there is not where I want to be. I want to be in here. And it's like, in here is also sexual liberation. In here is also sex positive. You're right, because we're, sometimes we, in response to backlash and oppression, we want to go all the way. And it's like, all of these things can be sexual liberation. All of them are possibilities because the goal of sexual liberation is to have access to whatever would facilitate our sense of liberation, not just another prescribed way of being sexually.
Yes.
Hey, friend.
Hey.
Okay, so you used the phrase earlier, and I had to put it in my notes because I was like, oh my gosh. You said unseasoned sexual recipes. I had to bring it back. I'm just curious from your research, what are some of the most common or maybe most interesting unseasoned sexual recipes?
Well, I think the point is they're not interesting. It's like raisins in the potato salad, vibes when it comes to the sexual script. So it's like a white, tall, cisgender, slim-bodied, able, heterosexual, middle or upper class man meets a white, slim, able-bodied, blonde-haired, blue-eyed, slim, college-educated, Christian, heterosexual woman, and they are only sexual with each other. They meet, they get married, and forevermore, they are only sexual with each other, and they have sex in missionary position, right?
Very.
And only when the man wants, because his pleasure is supreme, and her pleasure is optional because he's a provider and a protector. Like they're like all of these things that most of us hear all the time, right? Those are the unseasoned sexual menu. Now, mind you, you might need or want bland food in your life for a while, right? But maybe you want Lowry's. Maybe you want Tony Chachere's on your sexual life. Maybe you want hot lemon pepper wings instead of boiled chicken, right? So And so it's like those ingredients that I add in that I put in the book, they're like, I need a little bit of passion on this. I can't do the obligatory sex. I want passion. Or it's like, maybe I need a little love on this. I can't have dutiful, bland, like just for procreation purposes sex. I want it to feel loving, like, so those are some of the unseasoned sexual recipes.
It's like in the movie Sex Life on Netflix.
No, I
Not the
didn't watch
movie.
that.
It was a TV show on Netflix. Basically, like a woman, she had a born sex life with her husband, and she found this cute, handsome guy. I know having all the things, and it was a very good show. It's on Netflix called Sex Life.
The lemon pepper version.
Lemon pepper.
The lemon pepper version. We're in Atlanta, so we know it had to be lemon pepper.
That's right.
Right, and fry hard. All drumettes?
Yes.
Anybody? Who said drums? We can have a whole conversation just about the type of chicken wings we want, because this is Atlanta.
That's right. I think that's a beautiful place to wrap up.
Okay.
Thank you so much, John. Thank you so much.
I want to thank everybody for being here. I want to let our online folks know that they can buy the book by clicking this teal button at the bottom center of the screen. Just click that button and you'll be able to buy Good Sex, Stories, Science, and Strategies for Sexual Liberation directly from Charis. It really does help us. There you go, right there.
Come on. There you go.
Chanel.
Come on, Vanna.
Buy the book from Charis. We appreciate you. We got Vanna White right there helping us out.
Thank you.
And we would really love for everybody who is physically here to get their copies up front. If you already got your copy, there's pins, signing pins just right there.
I got
Okay, and you got it. So folks are just going to come to you.
Okay.
So you just stay put. So we can start making some lines. I do want to say we have another great sex ed program this coming Monday. It's a virtual event. It's with a trans non-binary author, and it's specifically for folks who are trans or non-binary wanting to ask. It's basically everything you want to know about sex, but we're afraid to ask. So if for folks who are trans or non-binary questioning and want to be in that space, come on out for that on Monday. All right, thanks y'all. We appreciate it.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
How you say this one? That's mine. Okay.